We all need a vacation sometimes. We want to escape the noise of the city, the stress of our jobs, and the endless glow of our screens. In the past, we stayed in hotels with front desks, security guards, and hundreds of other people. But the modern world has changed how we travel. Now, we open an app on our phones, scroll through beautifully filtered photos of private homes, and pay a complete stranger for the privilege of sleeping in their bed. We trust the 5-star ratings. We trust the platform. We convince ourselves that if a house looks beautiful on the internet, it must be safe. But when you drive 3 hours into the deep woods and your cell phone loses its signal, you have to ask yourself one question. Who else has a key to the front door? Welcome to our new documentary. Over the next hour, we are going to explore the terrifying true stories of isolated vacation rentals. This is Chapter 1, The Superhost. In November of 2022, a 28-year-old graphic designer named Maya decided to take a solo weekend trip. She lived in downtown Seattle and was desperate for some quiet time to finish a major art project. She found the perfect listing online. It was a stunning, modern, A-frame cabin, completely surrounded by dense pine trees. Located 40 miles away from the nearest town, the listing was called the Whispering Pines Retreat. The host, a man named Thomas, had over 50 glowing reviews and the coveted superhost badge. Maya booked it for 3 nights. She arrived at the cabin late on a Friday afternoon. The sky was already turning dark gray, and a cold rain was starting to fall. The cabin looked exactly like the photos. It was beautiful, clean, and completely isolated. There were no other houses for miles. She unlocked the front door using the digital keypad. As she stepped inside, she noticed how incredibly quiet it was. The thick glass windows blocked out the sound of the wind, creating an unsettling, heavy silence inside the house. She unpacked her bags in the main bedroom on the ground floor. She made a cup of tea, connected her laptop to the cabin's Wi-Fi, and sat down at the dining table to work. By 10 p.m., the woods outside were pitch black. The rain was drumming softly against the roof. Maya got up to use the bathroom before bed. The bathroom was located at the end of a short, narrow hallway. It was a luxurious, modern room with dark slate tiles and a massive wall-to-wall mirror above the double vanity. Maya turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on her face. As she reached for a towel, she paused. She looked at the massive mirror. Something felt slightly off. The mirror wasn't hanging on the wall. It was built directly into the wall, perfectly flush with the dark tiles. She remembered a trick she had seen in a viral video years ago. A way to test if a mirror is actually a two-way observation glass. She raised her hand and placed the tip of her index finger directly against the glass. In a normal mirror, there is a tiny gap between your physical finger and the reflection. because the reflective silver layer is painted on the back of the glass. But when Maya touched this mirror, her physical finger touched her reflection exactly. Tip to tip, dot, zero gap. Her stomach dropped. It was a two-way mirror. She stood perfectly still, her hand still pressed against the glass. Her breathing became shallow. She was entirely alone in the woods, looking into a piece of glass that someone could be looking out of. She needed to know for sure. She reached over and flicked the bathroom light switch off. The bathroom was plunged into total darkness. Maya took her phone out of her pocket, turned on the bright LED flashlight, and pressed the lens directly against the glass of the two-way mirror. The bright light cut through the dark glass, illuminating the hidden space on the other side. It wasn't a utility closet. It was a narrow, hidden room built perfectly between the walls of the cabin. And sitting inside that dark room, in a small folding chair, facing the mirror, was a man. He was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt. And the moment Maya's flashlight beam hit his face, he didn't run. He didn't hide. He just slowly raised his hand and tapped twice on the glass from his side. Tap, tap. Maya didn't scream. Her survival instinct completely took over. She backed out of the bathroom, turned around, and sprinted silently toward the front door. She didn't grab her laptop. She didn't grab her bags. She grabbed her car keys from the kitchen counter, threw open the front door, and ran out into the freezing rain. She locked herself in her car, backed blindly out of the dirt driveway, and drove at 80 miles an hour down the dark, winding mountain road until she reached a gas station 2 hours later. When the state police raided the A-frame cabin the next morning, the host, Thomas, was gone. But they found the hidden room behind the bathroom. Inside, they found a mattress on the floor, hundreds of hours of recorded footage, and a detailed notebook logging the daily habits of every single woman who had rented the cabin over the last 4 years. The digital world gives us the illusion of safety. We think a 5-star review means a place is secure. But when you are sleeping in a stranger's bed, you never truly know who designed the walls. When we return in Chapter 2, we will explore another beautiful getaway. But this time, the danger isn't hiding behind the mirror. It is hiding deep in the basement. Welcome back. In our first chapter, we learn that the walls of a beautiful cabin can hide a terrifying secret. But sometimes, the danger isn't hiding behind a mirror. Sometimes, it is waiting right beneath your feet. This is Chapter 2, The Basement Trap. When you rent an entire house, you expect to have access to the entire house. But occasionally, you will find a door that is padlocked shut, a closet marked private, a basement door with a heavy deadbolt. Hosts usually say it is just for storage. We usually believe them. In January of 2023, a young couple named Mark and Sarah rented a massive, historic farmhouse in upstate New York. It was a romantic winter getaway. The house was situated on 50 acres of private, snow-covered land. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles down a dirt road. The host, an older woman named Eleanor, met them at the property to hand over the keys. She was sweet and welcoming. She gave them a tour of the beautiful, rustic home. But when they reached a heavy oak door in the kitchen, Eleanor stopped. She pointed to the heavy iron padlock on the door. She said, "That is the basement. The foundation is very old and dangerous. It is strictly off limits. Do not try to open it." Mark and Sarah agreed. It was a massive house. They didn't need the basement. The first 2 days were perfect. It snowed heavily, trapping them in a beautiful winter wonderland. They built fires, drank wine, and enjoyed the absolute isolation. But on their 3rd night, the temperature outside dropped to -10 degrees. At 2 in the morning, Mark woke up shivering. The house was freezing. He checked the thermostat in the hallway. The digital screen was blank. The power to the heating unit was completely dead. He put on his heavy coat and found the house manual in the kitchen. He flipped through the pages until he found the section on power outages. The manual said the main breaker box was located at the bottom of the basement stairs. Mark frowned. The basement was locked, but the house was dropping below freezing. They couldn't survive the night without heat. He remembered seeing a ring of old rusted keys hanging on a hook in the laundry room. He grabbed the keys and walked to the heavy oak door in the kitchen. He found a thick iron key that fit the padlock. It turned with a heavy clank. He removed the lock and pulled the oak door open. A wave of freezing, damp air hit him in the face. It smelled like wet earth and rotting wood. He shined his phone flashlight down the steep wooden steps. He called out for Sarah. He told her he was going down to flip the breaker and asked her to stand at the top of the stairs with a flashlight. Sarah stood in the kitchen, shining her beam down into the dark. Mark slowly descended the creaking wooden steps. When he reached the bottom, he swept his light across the room. It wasn't a normal basement. It was massive, stretching the entire length of the house. The floor was packed dirt. He found the breaker box on the wall and flipped the tripped switch. He heard the furnace upstairs roar to life. He smiled and turned around to walk back up the stairs, but his flashlight beam caught something in the far corner of the basement, something that made his blood freeze. It was a perfect, exact replica of the bedroom they were sleeping in upstairs. There was a bed with the exact same sheets, a nightstand with the exact same lamp. But surrounding the bed were 4 heavy, professional video cameras on tripods, all pointing directly at the mattress. And sitting on the edge of that basement bed, staring directly at Mark in the dark, was a man wearing a dirty winter coat. Mark couldn't breathe. He recognized the coat. It was the same coat the sweet older host, Eleanor, had been wearing when she met them. But it wasn't Eleanor sitting there. It was a massive, bearded man. The man didn't move. He just smiled. Mark screamed. He screamed for Sarah to run. He sprinted toward the wooden stairs, his boots slipping on the dirt floor. He made it to the third step, and then Sarah screamed from the kitchen above. But it wasn't a scream of fear. It was a sudden, muffled yelp of pain. The heavy oak door at the top of the stairs slammed shut with a deafening crash. Mark heard the heavy iron padlock snap closed on the other side. He threw himself against the door, screaming Sarah's name, pounding his bloody fists against the thick oak wood. But the door didn't budge. From the other side of the door, he heard the sweet, welcoming voice of the host, Eleanor. She whispered, "I told you the basement was dangerous." And then, from the bottom of the stairs behind him, Mark heard the slow, heavy footsteps of the bearded man walking toward him in the dark. We rent these beautiful, isolated homes because we want to get away from people. But sometimes the isolation is exactly what the host is selling. Because when you are 5 miles away from the nearest road, no one can hear you screaming from the basement. When we return in Chapter 3, we will leave the snowy mountains and travel to the deep desert. Welcome back. In Chapter 2, we explored the horrors hidden beneath our feet. We saw how a physical space can be transformed into a cage. But what happens when the cage isn't a building at all? What happens when the destination you booked doesn't actually exist? This is Chapter 3, The Ghost Listing. The Mojave Desert is a vast, unforgiving expanse of rock and sand in Southern California. It is beautiful in its emptiness, drawing thousands of tourists every year who want to experience true off-grid living. They want to sleep under a sky completely free of light pollution. In July of 2024, a 35-year-old amateur astronomer named David found the perfect rental. It was listed as a luxury stargazing pod. The photos showed a beautiful, transparent, geodesic dome sitting alone in the middle of the desert basin. The host had a few generic but positive reviews. The listing had one strict rule. Because of the extreme isolation, the exact address would not be provided until 24 hours before check-in. The host explained that this was to prevent trespassers. David thought it made perfect sense. The day before his trip, he received an automated message with a set of GPS coordinates and a gate code. David left Los Angeles on a Friday afternoon. He drove for 4 hours, watching the city fade away in his rearview mirror. The paved highway eventually turned into a dusty, unmaintained dirt road. His cell service dropped to 0 bars. He was completely relying on his downloaded offline map. He drove down the dirt road for another 20 miles. The sun was setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the desert floor. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Finally, his GPS told him he had arrived. David stopped his SUV. He looked around. There was no transparent dome. There was no gate. There was no structure of any kind. It was just a flat, empty stretch of cracked desert earth surrounded by towering rock formations. David checked his phone. The GPS ping was exactly where he was parked. He assumed he had taken a wrong turn on the dirt roads. He got out of his car to stretch his legs and see if he could spot the dome over the next ridge. The desert was completely, terrifyingly silent. He climbed the small rock ridge next to his car and looked out over the basin. Nothing, just miles of empty sand and scrub brush. As he turned around to walk back to his SUV, he froze. A mile down the dirt road he had just driven in on, he saw a cloud of dust. A vehicle was approaching fast. David felt a wave of relief. He thought it must be the host, coming to guide him to the real location. He walked down the ridge and stood next to his car, waving his arms. The vehicle got closer. It wasn't a normal car. It was a heavily modified, matte, black pickup truck with massive off-road tires and a row of blinding LED light bars on the roof. The truck didn't slow down as it approached. It accelerated. David stopped waving. A sudden, cold dread settled in his stomach. The truck slammed on its brakes, skidding to a halt 30 feet away from David's SUV. The blinding LED lights pinned David against his own car like a spotlight on a stage. He couldn't see past the wall of white light. He raised his arm to shield his eyes. The driver's side door of the truck opened. Heavy boots crunched on the desert gravel. David yelled out, "Hello, are you the host? I think the coordinates are wrong." A deep, mechanical voice answered. It wasn't coming from a person. It was coming from a megaphone mounted on the hood of the truck. The voice said, "The coordinates are correct. You are exactly where you are supposed to be." David didn't wait to see what the driver looked like. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The beautiful listing, the photos, the reviews, it was all fake. It was bait. And he had just driven himself exactly where the hunter wanted him. David threw himself into the driver's seat of his SUV. He didn't even close the door. He slammed the car into reverse, ignoring the crunch of the rocks beneath his tires. He spun the wheel, shifting into drive, and floored the accelerator. He drove blindly off the dirt road and straight into the open desert. His SUV bouncing violently over the uneven terrain. He looked in his rear-view mirror. The black truck had turned around. It was tearing across the desert floor after him, its massive light bars cutting through the dark like the eyes of a predator. David drove for an hour, pushing his SUV past its breaking point, completely lost in the pitch-black desert. He eventually hit a paved road, blowing out a tire in the process. But he didn't stop until he saw the glowing lights of a 24-hour gas station. When the police investigated the GPS coordinates the next day, they found nothing but tire tracks. The Airbnb listing had been completely deleted from the platform. The internet allows us to book dreams, but we forget that the internet is also a perfect tool for setting traps. Anyone can create a fake profile. Anyone can upload stolen photos. And out in the deep desert, when your phone has no signal, you realize that the person you are meeting isn't a host. They are a predator. Stay tuned for our fourth and final chapter. We will return to the city. We will explore the terrifying reality of what happens when the stranger you are renting from decides that they never actually left the house. Welcome to our fourth and final chapter. Over the past 50 minutes, we have looked behind the mirror of a remote cabin. We have opened the forbidden basement door, and we have driven into a desert trap that didn't even exist. But our final story brings us back to civilization. It is a story about the most common type of vacation rental. A simple, affordable apartment in the middle of a crowded city. This is Chapter 4, The Hidden Host. In October of 2023, a couple named Greg and Lisa traveled to Chicago for a weekend wedding. They rented the entire first floor of a beautiful, renovated brownstone house in a quiet residential neighborhood. The listing said the host lived upstairs, but the floors were completely separate, with their own private entrances. They arrived late on a Friday night. The apartment was immaculate. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, and modern furniture. They unpacked, went to the wedding rehearsal dinner, and came back around midnight. They went to sleep in the master bedroom at the back of the house. At 3 in the morning, Lisa woke up. She was thirsty. She got out of bed and walked out into the dark hallway, heading toward the kitchen. The house was completely silent. But as she passed the living room, she noticed something strange. The faint orange glow from the streetlights outside was spilling through the front windows. And in the middle of the living room, sitting perfectly still in a large armchair, was the silhouette of a person. Lisa froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She thought it was a burglar. She didn't make a sound. She slowly backed away, retreating into the hallway. She ran back to the bedroom and frantically shook Greg awake. She covered his mouth with her hand and whispered that someone was in the house. Greg quietly got out of bed. He grabbed a heavy metal flashlight from his suitcase. He told Lisa to lock the bedroom door behind him and call 911. Greg crept down the hallway. He gripped the flashlight tight, his knuckles turning white. He reached the edge of the living room and peered around the corner. The silhouette was still there, sitting perfectly still in the armchair, facing the dead television screen. Greg took a deep breath. He stepped into the room, raised the flashlight, and clicked it on. The bright beam hit the armchair. It wasn't a burglar. It was an older man, wearing a faded bathrobe and thick glasses. He was holding a cup of tea. He didn't look surprised. He didn't even blink when the bright light hit his face. Greg yelled, "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The man slowly turned his head. He looked at Greg with a completely blank expression. He said, "I am the host. This is my house. I just came down to watch television." Greg was stunned. He said, "We rented the entire floor. The listing said it was private." The man took a slow sip of his tea. He smiled, exposing a row of yellowed teeth. He said, "It is private, but I live here. I always watch television at 3 in the morning." Greg didn't argue. He backed out of the room, ran to the bedroom, and told Lisa they were leaving right now. They grabbed their bags, completely ignoring the man who was still sitting in the dark living room, and ran out the front door. They stayed at a hotel and contacted the rental platform the next morning. When the company investigated the host, they found a pattern of deeply disturbing complaints. Previous female guests had reported finding their underwear moved, and one guest claimed she woke up to find the host standing at the foot of her bed, watching her sleep. The host had simply deleted the listing and created a new profile every time he was reported. When we rent a home online, we are buying a temporary illusion. We are pretending that the space is ours. But the truth is, you are simply a guest in a stranger's territory. And sometimes, the host isn't willing to give up their territory at all. Thank you for surviving this 1-hour journey into the terrifying reality of isolated rentals. If you made it to the very end of this documentary, leave a comment down below and tell me which of these 4 true stories made you never want to book a room again. If you want to hear more deep dives into the dark, the unsolved, and the unknown, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell and give this video a like. Stay safe, always check the mirrors, and I will see you in the next nightmare.